here's the shader applied that we're going to be creating. You can see we have 3 channels plugged in. And if I select the group, you'll see we have some parameters that we're going to be talking about in a little bit. These are basically influence controls. If we look inside, you can see it looks pretty complex, but it actually isn't. We've just got some basic math controls. And this is for keeping the ratio correct between the holes. So if we scale down the main noise, the other ones keep the same ratio. We've got a layer shader. We're calculating the displacement. We're calculating an ambient occlusion pass and bump, which is not necessary for this shader to work. Make sure you check the video description for associated project files. Also, the community tab has plenty of free resources like Substance materials, Espresso rigs, and After Effects presets. I'll be building up plenty of content for the community to enjoy. I'll be doing a free mega bundle giveaway for the first 500 Rockstar subscribers to my channel. So make sure you smash the subscribe button to stay up to date and like the video to show your support. It's greatly appreciated. Let's dive in. So let's go ahead and build this out. So I'll expose my attributes here, double click, and then I'm going to replace. You can see it swapped out, and I'm going to get rid of the previews. We don't need to see them. First things first, we're going to bring up a displacement, and this is going to be the main driver of it. So you want to start off at the beginning with it. We'll bring in a layer shader. I'm going to give it some space because we're going to need other nodes in between these. And for the base, we want to set this to white. And the reason being is these are all going to be blended over the top. And so when we have the effect happening and you want to dial it back, you just move the slider and that will reveal the white. Okay, so we'll plug this in. We'll move over here and we'll plug this into the bump. We actually don't need the color. So I'm going to turn off color. We don't need color. Reflection, I'm going to bring to 0.45 and bring down the IOR to 1.35. Don't need transmission. And then we're going to need the overall tint. So I'm going to command click or control click on a Mac, and that brings in the next node input. Reflection is good. And then our next one that we need is the subsurface. So I'll crank that up. And I'm going to pick an orangey, darker orangey color for our sponge color. So I set the hue to 38 and then 50%, somewhere around 50% for the color here. And then I'm going to just swatch this. And then I'm going to make this one slightly brighter, somewhere around there. And I'll make it a little bit yellower, so like 40. And we look at it, we now have a waxy kind of material, which is what we want. Depending on your scene scale, you might need to adjust the radius of the scale here, which is that gradient that you can see on the edges. How much does that affect inward? It just so happens due to my scene scale that the value is best at 1, but you might need to turn yours up to like 10 or something if your scene is really large, or if it's really small, you might need to do 0.2 or something. So let's start building up the look. So first things first, we need a noise, and this is going to be the base noise. So I'll come in here and add it as layer 1. And then for the noise, I'm going to set the seed to 1. And each layer we add in here, we're going to increase the seed. For this to look good, our base needs to be set to Voronoi 1, and all of the noises that we're going to be setting are going to be based off of Voronoi 1. We don't need octaves. And I'm just going to set this to 10, and we'll look at what we have. So I'll zoom in here a little bit. What ends up happening is the gradient that's used on the noise, these holes, is linear. You can see it makes like a perfect inverted mountain shape. We want a curvature, a rounding to happen. So in order to do that, we're going to need to bring up a ramp, and I'm going to use the scalar ramp, which is basically a curve, and we'll let go over the line here, and it applies it. And what we'll do is we want to curve this in so it's facing down, and this one is horizontal, and that will give us that nice rounding that we need. The next thing you'll see is it kind of looks like a cheese or like very mountainous. You want to separate these holes, and so in order to do that, what we need to do is we need to bring this high clip, and I'll just set it to 0.6, and you can see the smaller this number, the more separate these holes are going to be. So if I go to 0.5, you can see the holes separated more. I'm going to add a little bit of contrast to this, maybe 0.25, to just separate them a little bit more. I'm going to take this scalar ramp and duplicate it. So I'm going to control drag or command drag it into layer 2. We don't need this mask, nor do we need this mask. Before I move further, I'm going to enable all of these inputs and bring up the inputs on the color. So I'm command clicking. So now they're all enabled. We're going to be using all the slots, and then we're going to add blending mode of multiply to all of these. And then we're going to disable these. So for our first one, I want to bring down the amount to like 0.585. Bring down the maximum on this one as well, the mask, to 0.5, and you can adjust these later. Now, right now they're stacked on top of each other, so we're layer number 2, so I'm going to set this to 2, and there we go. If you look at sponges, like wash sponges, separated pretty well. So these are too close together, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring down the scale to 6, and now we have smaller holes, and I'm going to duplicate this one a couple more times. So I'll duplicate it, input it, change the number, bring the value down on this next one to 0.5, maybe to 0.35. And there we go. So we're starting to get somewhere. So it still looks like cheese right now. If you want to make a cheese shader, this is perfect. I'm going to duplicate it again and put it number 4, change the number of the seed to number 4, set this to 5, and do this another time. And this next one, we're going to go to 3. And then this last one of this type of noise, number 6, we're going to make set to 2. And I'm going to solo this for a second. And you can see these ones are going to be our detailed holes, and they're pretty small. So I'm actually going to bring these back to 3, but then reduce the contrast and bring up the high clip so they're closer together. And that looks pretty good. I'll zero this one out. Let's do 0.8. And I'm going to solo or turn off all of these. Let's enable number 6. We'll bring these values to 0.25, 0.25, 0.25. So this last one is going to be our micro detail. We want to turn them all off and get this one looking good. So this should be a consistent hole, which it's doing. So that looks pretty good. Let me zoom out here a little bit. So you can see our holes are consistently over the whole surface, which is what we want. And then this last one, I'm going to enable it. What we want to do is we want to add a new noise. And this is going to be a blanket that just disrupts the whole surface. I'm going to solo it and get this looking right. So our scene scale of this is too small. So I'm going to set this to 10, change this seed number to 7. And I'm going to add something like blistered turbulence that just has a bunch of noise over it. And this is going to be like a coating over the top of all of these that just disrupts the whole surface. And this is going to be set pretty low. Let's do 0.125. There we go. Let's get the ambient occlusion set up. So to do this, we're going to need another layer, color layer. And we don't need the mask for number 2 or the color for number 2 or the mask. So we just have the base color, which we'll make white, and I'll call this AO. We'll plug in our color layer and plug this into the overall tint. And you'll notice it's really intense. So what we can do is we now have a slider that's revealing the white. So if we reveal the white, it will reduce the value. So we want to do it to where it's barely visible, maybe like 0.2. That looks pretty good. And let's check and see how we're looking so far. So you can see we've got like a spongy material now. So let's work on the reflection, and you can see it looks too hot right now. So what we'll do is we'll go to the reflection and just bring this down to something like 0.45. And this will depend on how bright your scene is, but ideally you should have it kind of low, as you don't want that sponginess doesn't really have a big highlight. Now, the other thing that we want is we want to make it look like, if you look at sponges, they make a foam shape, and then they trim it so it has harder edges. So what we can do to fix that is if we add a curve, so a ramp, bring in the property here. So I'll bring in the alt input, drag in our color here, and we plug this into the noise displacement, call it trim. And what we want to do is we want a linear. Right now we have handles. So I'm going to go to spline presets, linear. And I'm just going to take this and drag this down to the middle. And you're going to see it jumps. And what this does, this flattens the material foam. You'll need to mess with this to get this just right. You'll find a sweet spot. There we go. So there's that. And to get the bump to work, we'll bring in bump. And this one's not necessary. It doesn't really contribute because we're using such a heavy displacement. But we'll go ahead and plug it in anyway. So there we go, and I'll bring this down. And one last section that we have not done, and that is between these, we're now bumping up and down. So if I solo this, you can see we've got white as our base. We want 50% gray. So we need to clamp this value. So let me zoom out here and just bring these over. So in between this, we need a change range. The color change range is what we'll be using. I'll plug it in. And we want our base white value. So these two are our inputs. These are our outputs. So we're inputting a black and a white, but what we want is a black to 50% gray because we only want to bump down. So neutral is 50% gray, and you can see the black will then bump down. So we'll open this up, plug this in to our bump, and we can also do it for the displacement and bump. Call this clamp. So there we go. So I'll unsolo. So now what you can see is we need to adjust the trim on this. So let's bring it back up and check this. And you'll want this node in here, this trimming node. So you can see I brought it to 50%. We don't really need it, but if you did something that it's good to have this node in place just in case you need to trim. So that looks pretty good. And it looks like I can bring up the values here. So I'm going to go to 0.5 on this. And then for number 6, or number 5, sorry, I want these ones to be influenced more. So on number 5, I'm going to, actually, let's see number 6. Yeah, number 5. I want these holes to be slightly more intense. So we'll have 2 sets of holes that are deeper. There we go. So now we can zoom out and it looks nice. So that wraps up this phase. Oh, I should mention, so the backside of this texture that's green, the scrub brush part, the scrubby section, is just got smaller scale values. So once you create this shader, you can see here, I just set the scale down to 4, while the base of the yellow one is set to 10. Okay, so what I want to discuss is grouping this up and making it a shader node that we can share, make a preset out of, and use on any project. So when you double click and you go here to texture, you can see we have things like AO, curvature, flakes is a good one. Flakes is just a shader node group. Pavement as well is a shader node group. And so we want to be able to do this for foam or sponge, whatever you want to call it. So what we'll do is we're going to select all of our nodes that we have so far and then right click on one of them. Sometimes the right click doesn't work. I don't know why. So you go to group nodes, Alt G, and I'll call this sponge anything. I like giving it a color of 220, 100, and 100. And what we're going to do is we want to name these outputs. So you can see displacement is the first one. Displacement. This one here is the AO. So I'll call it AO, ambient occlusion. And then this one's our bump. So that way we know which ones to plug in. I'm going to change the order. I'm going to put displacement on the bottom and change AO to be in the middle. So we have clean lines. And put this closer. And let's expose some parameters. So you can see when I select it, we don't have those properties here and the tab where we can see these settings. So let's go ahead and do some of these. I'm not going to do all of them, but I'll show you the gist of it. So the first one that I like doing is I want to make sure that the user can change the scale of these while keeping the ratio between the dots the same. So to do that, I'm going to just do a couple of these because it does take some time. So what we do is we expand the scale and we need a value. So I'm going to type in value. And I like making my value nodes red so they're easy to see. And I'll call this one scale. And we want our base scale to be the exact same. So we'll just command click the overall scale and drag it in and set the scale to a integer, set it to 10. So this is what we have so far. So the reason I didn't have it in float is because floats allow you to only go to 10 and they're decimals. We want whole numbers that can go as large as we want. So integers is what we want. Now I want this scale to be in the same ratio. So you can see this one's set to 6. So what we'll do is to get that ratio, we need a multiply node and we'll plug in the input. So it's bringing in 10. And then if we multiply it by 0.6, which is 60%, we'll get our new size. Let's do that one's 60 as well. This one's 50. So we'll just bring up 50 here, take the multiply node, put 0.5. There we go. Might as well do this one. So we can say 60%. This one's 50. Plug it in, input 1. And I'll do one of these smaller ones. Let's do, this one's going to be 30%. We'll take our multiply node, command click, 0.3. There we go. So now we can scale these in the correct ratio. So I'm going to do all the other ones actually. So this one's 0.3 as well. This one's exactly the same, 10. Call this one overall. It's like the coding noise. Next, what we want to do is we want to do blending mode amounts. So we want to be able to blend these. And so we can expose these parameters quite easily. So I'll call this one, I'll move this one up here and call this noise amount. And we don't need to see this. Okay, so let's do the noise amount. So we'll do noise amount. Let's change this to large amount. Duplicate it. We'll do medium amount. And then do detail amount. So we'll expand the parameters. So the first one's large. So they all have their masks. And so the first one is set to 0.85. We need to change to float, change all of them to float. So we just plug this in to the first one, change it to 0.85. Medium is going to be these three. So we'll do this as our first, and these are set to 0.5, 0.5. And then these are our fine detailed ones. So those are set to 0.25, 0.25. Plug it in. And I'm just command clicking the node wire. And then this one here, the overall, we can just use the large amount. So there we go. That's going to give us a mask for each of those. We want to expose the bump amount. So I'll see it's 0.5. So I'll come in here to add it. Call this bump amount. Set to 0.5. We also want the displacement, which is actually not in here. So that's one little error that I forgot to do. So this, I'm going to just copy it. Go inside, paste it, plug this in here, set it to 1. We brought it into the wrong one. Here we go. So we'll go to this clamp. We'll just take this here. There we go. I want it to be inside so we don't have to worry about it. So now this just goes directly in like that. Much cleaner. You can add a node here, a rerouter node, Control Shift click. We'll call this displacement amount. There we go. So my displacement's inside of it, so we'll get a slider for it and it'll all be controlled into 1. We'll leave the trim just by its default, that's fine. The clamp doesn't need to be adjusted. The last one we need is the AO. So we want to expose this as a parameter here where we can adjust the darkening. So I'll command click here, drag the displacement over, call this AO amount. And that's set to 0.25, I believe. Let's check, 0.2. We'll add it in to the mask, bring it down to 0.2. And there we go. So we've rerouted it. Now you can get it fancier and add more control to this if you want. But these are the base controls. So how do we get the parameters to be exposed? So when I click this node, I want to see those parameters. It's actually super simple. So we'll start off with the first one, which is going to be scale. And you just click and drag and let go. And you get this flyout menu and you just say add new input. And it takes the input, takes the name from the node. So we'll do large amount, medium amount, small amount. And then we'll do the AO amount, bump amount, and displacement amount. And you can see it takes the names. So now when I select this node, you can see we've got these settings. Now, one thing you might want to do is have a line divider. And if you do that, you're going to want to screenshot these settings because I have found when you make UI changes, it resets your values. Unfortunately, it will reset these values. So screenshot these because you'll lose them. They'll default all to 0. And the way you do it is you right click in this field and you say edit resource and open this up. And what you do is you can see there's our inputs that we have, those exposed parameters. Scroll all the way to the bottom and you'll see there's a separator and you can click and drag those values in between. So I'm going to pay attention to these here. Let's see. I'm just going to remember them and I'll show you. You just drag the separator. We'll do scale separate. We'll do these separated, this separate, and this separate. And you can see now we have lines between them. It just makes it a little bit easier to see, but you'll notice the parameters changed. So now that we're done, we hold OK, close the window, and then I have to come in here and say large amount was 0.85, medium amount was 0.5, this was 0.25, the AO amount was 0.2, bump amount was 0.5, and displacement was 1. And there you go. So this just makes it way easier to look at than a big giant list of settings. Just remember, before you make changes to the UI, you're going to want to remember these numbers. And there we go. So next what we can do is we can save this as an asset. So if you select it, you go to asset and say convert to asset, and then you get this menu. And what you can do is you can click this little drop down hamburger button, and you can see I've got one called Eric's Tools. So if you want to, you have to click the tray, make a database for your special nodes, say Eric's tools, and then I'll leave it sponge anything, give it the version number, and then hit OK. And then what it'll do is you'll be able to go into your set search here, type in sponge, and if I had it, it would show up. So anytime I needed a spongy foam for like headphone foam, pillows, sponges, obviously, or any other thing, you'll have access to it, and you just plug in these values and then make the changes. And that is a reusable sponge anything node. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on more content. Thanks for your support.